What if I told you that the greatest military conquest in history didn't just move borders, it fundamentally changed how we handle money? Today, we're diving deep into the accidental economic revolution sparked by the Mongol Empire. We all know Genghis Khan as the master strategist, the conqueror who united disparate nomadic tribes. But his legacy goes far beyond the battlefield. It touches every single dollar, euro, or yen in your pocket. The story of global paper currency isn't solely a Chinese one, though they invented it. It's a Mongol story. Specifically, a logistical nightmare that forced the Khanates to adopt a revolutionary, yet fatally flawed financial system. But before we get to the chaos, let's set the stage. By the 12th century, the dominant form of exchange across Asia was silver, copper, and commodity trade, especially silk. China, under previous dynasties like the Song, had experimented with paper money, known as jiaozi. It was meant to solve the shortage of copper cash and the weight problem of shipping metal. However, these early attempts often ended in rapid inflation and distrust. Dynasties would issue too much, too fast, and citizens quickly reverted back to reliable metal. Enter Genghis Khan. His initial focus wasn't on currency innovation. It was on conquest, administration, and efficiency. He needed a stable way to pay his armies and tax his newly conquered subjects. As the empire expanded into Persia, Central Asia, and eventually China, the logistics became terrifying. How do you govern and unify trade across 4 time zones and thousands of miles? The sheer weight and volume of metal currency required for this level of transcontinental trade were monumental. Silver mines couldn't keep up with the demands of empire building. This brings us to the successor, who would unwittingly become the driving force behind paper money, Genghis's grandson, Kublai Khan, the founder of the Yuan Dynasty. Kublai faced a unique challenge. He ruled sedentary, highly sophisticated China, but his treasury was fundamentally Mongol, nomadic, and centralized. He needed immediate, flexible control over the economy. In 1260, Kublai Khan launched the most aggressive and centralized adoption of paper currency the world had ever seen. He called it the Chow. Unlike previous systems, the Chow wasn't optional. Kublai made it the sole legal tender for large transactions throughout the vast Chinese part of the empire. Refusing it was punishable by death. This was the true genius and, simultaneously, the great folly of the Mongol experiment. Total centralization and backing by the state, without the option of converting back to gold or silver. Initially, it worked wonders. The empire had a stable, lightweight, and easily transportable medium of exchange. It streamlined trade and collection of taxes across provinces. This unprecedented economic centralization stunned foreign travelers, most notably the Venetian explorer Marco Polo, who visited Khambalik during this high point. Polo described the process meticulously. The Khan causes every year to be made such a vast quantity of this money that he has it carried to all his provinces and kingdoms and territories, and pays for everything with it. He noted the respect commanded by the paper, stating that subjects accepted it as if it were made of pure gold or silver. This highlights the faith initially placed in the Khan's power. Polo's account is critical because it became the primary source that introduced the concept of pure fiat, state-backed paper currency, to the European imagination decades later. But the power of issuing money without backing is an intoxicating poison, and the Mongols, for all their military genius, proved to be terrible central bankers. The problem started subtly. To fund costly military campaigns like the invasions of Japan and Java, Kublai needed immense capital, and he found the printing press far easier than taxing the provinces. Each failed campaign cost the empire millions, forcing the treasury to print more paper, devaluing the currency already in circulation. The Mongols tried to combat the devaluation by periodically issuing new replacement currencies, sometimes exchanging a stack of old notes for just a handful of new ones. This move, of course, destroyed public confidence. If the state could simply declare yesterday's money worthless, why trust today's? By the late Yuan Dynasty, long after Kublai's death, the situation spiraled into hyperinflation. The currency became virtually worthless, used primarily as decorative wrapping or toilet paper. By the time the Ming Dynasty overthrew the Mongols in 1368, the use of paper money in China was so heavily associated with the failure and chaos of the yuan that the new regime largely reverted to silver. It took China centuries to try state-backed paper currency again. The yuan experiment was a resounding failure in execution. But here is the historical twist. The failure of the Chow in China didn't mean the idea of paper money died. In fact, the Mongol expansion had already accidentally exported the concept globally along the Silk Road. Remember, the Mongol Empire was one contiguous political entity, allowing for unparalleled movement of people, goods, and, crucially, ideas from east to west. The crucial next step happened in Persia, in the Mongol Ilkhanate, another branch of the empire ruled by Genghis's descendants. By the late 13th century, the Ilkhanate ruler Gaikatu was facing his own fiscal crisis, worsened by heavy military spending and the depletion of silver mines. Seeing the reports and envoys returning from Kublai Khan's successful, albeit temporary, use of the Chow in China, Gaikatu decided to replicate the system. In 1294, the Ilkhanate introduced its own paper money, the Chow, borrowing the name from the Chinese Chow, intended to solve their silver shortage overnight. They set up printing houses called Chowkhane and declared the paper mandatory. Just like in China, they tried to enforce it ruthlessly. But the cultural and economic backdrop of Persia was entirely different from centralized China. Persia was a hub for international trade, deeply reliant on trusted silver and gold for foreign exchange. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. Persian merchants, especially foreign traders, refused to accept the paper, demanding precious metals that held universal value. The entire economy seized up. Merchants stopped bringing goods to market. International trade collapsed. People simply hid their valuable silver and gold. Within just 2 months, the chaos was so severe, the ruler Gaikatu was forced to abolish the Chow. It was a complete, humiliating reversal. The Mongol experiment with paper money, both in China and Persia, was a textbook lesson in hyperinflation and the destruction of monetary trust. But here is the accidental legacy. When the Mongol Empire fractured, the knowledge of this powerful, centralizing financial tool, paper currency, did not vanish. Travelers, diplomats, and merchants who witnessed the Yuan and Ilkhanate experiments carried that knowledge westward to Europe. Though the implementation was disastrous, the concept of paper money, backed purely by state decree rather than inherent metallic value, was revolutionary. For centuries, European economies were paralyzed by the scarcity principle, the requirement of gold and silver to back every transaction. Marco Polo's vivid descriptions of Kublai Khan's paper money, even mentioning the death penalty for refusal, fascinated European royalty and early banking pioneers. They didn't focus on the yuan's eventual collapse. They focused on the initial power, the ability to create wealth and liquidity seemingly out of thin air to run an enormous empire. This Mongol knowledge contributed to the slow evolution of European banking, moving from basic promissory notes backed by gold toward true state-issued fiat currency. The lessons learned from the Mongol failure: don't print too much too fast and maintain a semblance of fiscal discipline, were just as important as the concept itself. Even during the Black Death, which severely disrupted trade, the administrative structures and economic ideas established during the Pax Mongolica persisted in memory. In essence, Genghis Khan's empire, intended to centralize military power, inadvertently created the largest economic laboratory the medieval world had ever seen. The Mongols introduced 2 key requirements for modern finance. 1, a unified medium of exchange across a massive territory, and 2, the absolute necessity of public faith in government issuance. Every time you use a banknote today, you are utilizing a concept that was popularized, if not perfected, by the Mongol state struggling to govern too much territory. It highlights a profound truth of history. The consequences of our actions often ripple out in ways we never intend, turning military conquests into financial accelerators. The failure of the Yuan Dynasty currency serves as a timeless warning against political overreach and unchecked money supply, a lesson policymakers still grapple with today. But its success lay purely in its initial function, demonstrating that metal was not essential. That state decree, backed by absolute power, could momentarily replace intrinsic value. The legacy of Genghis Khan is not just about the horse archer or the size of his domain. It's about the economic seeds he unintentionally planted that blossomed into global financial systems. So, the next time you tap your card or hand over a $20 bill, remember the vast, dusty Silk Road. Remember the ambitious, yet ultimately reckless, economic experiments of the Mongol Khanates. They accidentally standardized the tool that defines our global economy, an accidental revolution sparked by a need for logistical ease across an empire too vast to measure. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden connections between military history and finance, let me know in the comments below. We cover surprising history topics every week, digging up the stories that change how you see the world. Your support truly helps us keep these historical investigations going. Which historical figure do you think had the biggest accidental impact on the modern world? I'd love to hear your theories. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. We'll be back soon with another hidden chapter of global history. Until then, keep exploring and stay curious. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates.